It's a very simple question, Professor. Why do you hate God?
Because he took everything away from me. Yes, I hate God. All I have for him is hate.
If you're an atheist, does it bother you when people say things like this?
Believers, do you really think that this is why atheists are atheists? Hi, I am Mateo, or Teo, el Ateo, de Nuestra Experiencia Atea.
And I am Laura from Unapologetically Me. And we are going to discuss the real reasons why people are atheist.
No, I don't believe in any religion because it just doesn't make any sense to.
I used to be a Christian up until I was about 18. The way my pastor and other people in the church handled the apologetics, I found, I don't know if unimpressive is the right word, but unconvincing. I thought the arguments in favor of the apologetics were just really bad.
I don't believe anymore. And it's all because I started asking questions.
I do not believe because I do not think there is any good evidence to do so.
I've always loved science, and being raised in a religious family, it was always difficult to put those two together, and in the end, science won.
Throughout this video, we are going to be discussing a lot of broad generalizations, but remember that there's always exceptions. When it comes to atheism, as like anything else, there's no one-size-fits-all.
We are going to start by telling you some of the real reasons why atheists actually don't believe. And actually, Laura, didn't you make a whole research about this?
Yeah, so I did a research project for my bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology, and the topic I chose was why people are atheist. Some things that we have to keep in mind while I'm talking about this research is it was not a formal project. The design of the project was to teach anthropology students how to do research. So there was no formal process, and all of the numbers are a lot smaller, and the study was a lot quicker than an actual formal study would be. Nevertheless, I talked to real atheists and got 217 real responses. So there is some data here that we can play with. Just keep in mind that it's not a formal study that's been scrutinized and peer reviewed. So what I noticed is that the top 5 reasons why people are atheist are that people were not convinced by religious arguments, that belief in God is not supported by the evidence, the use of critical thinking and reason, and belief in gods is not supported by historical data. So when you talk in terms of atheists being angry at God, or the top reasons for being an atheist as being an emotional thing, what I found during my research was that it was the exact opposite, that the predominant reason that atheists gave for being atheists involved more scientific, historical, critical thinking reasons and didn't delve so much at all into the angry atheist thing.
You know what? Actually, this is related to some interviews that I'm doing right now. I'm asking atheists why they are atheists, and most of them tell me similar reasons. Either they are not convinced, or actually many of them were very strong believers, and when they started studying due to academic reasons, or just comparing different religions, they realized that something was wrong. There was something that didn't make sense in there, and even I can say that my personal experience falls into that. When you start seeing how religions contradict each other and how they disagree with science and what we actually understand from the world, something inside you starts breaking.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my experience was exactly the same. The more questions that I asked about religion and the more I studied religious concepts and also the world around me, the less that they fit together and the less sense that it made. So there is something to be said about the angry atheist thing, because there are times where people are angry and we need to really suss out what exactly that means. So in my study, I added in 2, on the survey options, I added in 2 sort of test options in addition to the various scientific reasons or emotional reasons that someone may or may not be an atheist. I added desire to commit sins and angry at a god or gods. And with all the different options out there and all the various levels of interaction with them, these 2 overwhelmingly got does not apply or the lowest rating, which was a 1. So either 1 or does not apply. So it really shows that of the 217 people that took this study, those 2 reasons are not reasons across the board. for why people choose to be atheists.
Okay, and all these reasons that people give, normally they show some interesting stuff. For example, I have a guy who was very angry when he stopped believing, but he didn't know who he was angry at. He felt he had been lied, but he wasn't sure who had lied because his parents, they actually believed this stuff. Was God lying to him, but God is not real? Was he lying to himself? So he was pretty confused and he was pretty angry in the beginning. That's why we see a lot of angry atheists out there on Facebook fighting against religion. And that's why many people believe this stereotype of the video of I hate God, but reality is not like that. We do have angry atheists, but there are several reasons for that.
Yeah, so that's correct. So one thing to keep in mind when you talk about the video, the person who is just legitimately angry at God, that person is still a theist. So that person believes in a God, they just don't like the God. So that's a whole nother conversation. And that's a separate issue from atheism. Okay, so where does the angry atheist stereotype come from? In my survey, I had a list of options that people could select from. And then I also had a blank space where they could write in their own options or their own reasons, or maybe expand on the reasons that they gave. And I got a lot of answers back, 73 out of 217 responses. So that's a lot of people who had a lot to say. Most of it was just clarifying what they mean by the historical data or the scientific data, kind of giving a broader narrative. But I got some interesting results that play into this whole angry atheist thing, and I think really speak to why the angry atheist stereotype is out there. So some of these reasons included comments like, religion is a very unethical business, or I felt forced into religion by my parents, and then they tried to force my child as well. Or that there's internal hypocrisy in all organized religions. One that stuck out with me was that religion makes good people bad.
Oh yeah, that's just like Steven Weinberg says, with or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion. And also, as you see, there is kind of a counteroffensive, an attack from religion or from churches who want to make atheists look like bad people. So the angry atheist becomes even more angrier at this, and people are going to always look at them as angry people because there is a stigma on society, and there is a huge campaign trying to show us as evil people, the evil baby-eating monster that church wants us to be.
You're right. And something to point out is that anger doesn't just happen within the atheist community. You have really fired up religious people as well. People, for example, in the Christian church who tend to speak out like that, they'll just call them, oh, they're just a Christian extremist. They don't represent my views. When an atheist is angry, oh, that represents the entire atheist community's views. And in both cases, the reason why the person is angry or is upset tends to get glossed over or misrepresented. For example, my angry atheist phase really revolved a lot around the decisions that I made while I was religious, and especially how I raised my kids. So a lot of regret in training my children to think a certain way without the skepticism and critical thinking, but also training them to accept things without good reasons and to have a lot of fear and to have this rigid way of seeing the world. It made me really upset at myself. And it also made me really upset that it's such a mainstream way to think. So my angry atheism was really more about me personally recovering from the trauma that I had caused to myself and to my family and having to get past that.
Wow, that's kind of similar to mine. I loved religion when I was a child, so I studied with several of them. And as an adult, I realized I was trying to push my family into doing stuff. I was even against Christmas for a while. Can you believe that? Terrible.
I was too.
Yeah, it's awful. And as an adult, I realized that they robbed me something that I loved, which was science. I loved biology at school, and it should have been my favorite science. It didn't help that my biology teacher was an ass, but anyways, the point is that they brainwashed me. So for a long time, I believed that, okay, all this thing of evolution is impossible because I learned that it was impossible. Mm-hmm. And then when I stopped believing, I was for a long time in this weird situation where, okay, I don't believe in a God able to do this because I've seen so many contradictions that make no sense. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe in evolution, so I have no idea how things happened. And now, of course, that's one of my favorite subjects. I talk about it all the time. I have some episodes about it. Nice. And that's why I think that science is so important, that education is so important. And that's why I'm always advocating about science, which is, by the way, the topic that I want to talk about with you, Laura, because you are studying science.
I was, yeah, I just graduated. So I'm currently not studying, not formally anyway. But
Amazing,
yes,
even
science.
better.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating what we do know about the world. And it's something that we're not necessarily taught, especially as religious people. A lot of the information we get is very controlled. And there's a lot of counter information getting put out there for things like evolution and many different scientific concepts that contradict the Bible. So it's like, I'll accept this form of science because it's applicable to my real life. It creates my cell phones. It creates my well-being. It helps our food be better and healthier. But I'm going to discard this science because it contradicts my religious beliefs.
Yeah, you're totally right. Science is extremely important. And for atheists, actually, it's very, very important. Science is going to be a big reason for a lot of people to become an atheist. Wish it had been my reason, but because I love the thing, because each one of the several branches of science can prove religion and deities to be probably not real. For example, if you study at anthropology, that is going to study humans, our minds, it's going to explain our fears, how we create myths, how we create these stories to explain what we don't understand. And thanks to that, we know that that's how religions start. If we study biology, we understand evolution, how life is going to be changing, how we came from fish. That's why we have hip hop's, and amongst other things. So yeah, evolution disproves creation. The same goes with geology. It tells us about the age of the planet, tectonic plates, how the planet is moving, how continents are moving far away. Once again, no creation, no 6 days creation. And it tells us how old our planet really is, more than 4 billion years. In Spanish, 4,000 millones de años. And psychology, obviously, it's going to tell us how humans think, and studying our brain, we understand how each part of our brain is going to decide or define our personality for us or what we are. There's no space for a soul in there. If we study philosophy and we apply the various tools that come with it, like inductive reasoning, ontology, and theology, we can get to the same realization that with all the other previous branches. As I said, neurobiology tells us about our brain, and astronomy, it's going to tell us the distance of the stars and planets, and it's going to show us how the stars became what they are, how planets exist, how it's impossible for the Earth to exist before the rest of the universe, before the sun, etc. So all of this is going to prove those religions wrong. And that's why it's so important, and it's such an important and determining factor for atheists to live their religion.
Yeah, and one thing that's important to keep in mind, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but not every single atheist is an atheist because of science. I just think that science offers explanations that encourage people more toward atheism, and give people a different outlook of the world. So I think it's increasing atheism. But it's important for us to remember that there are atheists out there that don't believe for purely emotional reasons. They might not believe for reasons that don't make any sense to us. So not every single atheist is alike.
You're totally right. This is a very important point, but it's not the main reason. This is going to be very egocentric, but I'm the perfect example of it. I didn't used to believe in science at all. I didn't understand much of it. I still don't understand much of it. But I stopped believing because I realized that most of this was mostly an emotional appealing to what we don't understand. And I've met several people with different ideas, or people who actually don't understand much about science, or even anti-vaxxers can be atheists. So it's pretty interesting to understand that science helps, but it's not the definite thing that makes you an atheist.
Yeah, it's not like a vaccine where it's foolproof, but it seems to be a pretty predominant tool.
So tell us, Laura, if atheists use science to think about this, what is science saying about atheists? That is your field, right?
Yeah, so this is exactly what I studied. And there are several sources out there that discuss why people are atheists. And I'm actually going to read some paragraphs like kind of straight from my paper. So there's different scientific ways of looking at atheism. So you could look at how the brain functions. You could look at psychology. You could look at sociology or anthropology. And you can even look at philosophy and how people, like how philosophy can study why people are or are not religious. So one way of looking at atheism is sociologically. So the process of going from being a religious person to an atheist, or what a self-avowed atheist kind of goes through in their process. And one thing that Jesse Smith points out in his article is that atheists typically have to do a culture shift when we become atheists, especially those who used to be religious. So one way that science looks at atheism is how it impacts the individual in their cultures. In Smith's article, he discusses how they have to give up a lot of their cultural practices, things like how they view holidays or how they view certain practices like prayer and other normative beliefs that would have been part of their upbringing, or at least part of their cultural experience. Another way that science looks at atheism is looking at the deconversion process. So Stephen LeDrew, in his article Discovering Atheism, took a study of some of the more popular atheists and what their deconversion stories were. And he found that people tend to go through a process during deconversion. So it follows this sort of general progression, including initial questioning of the belief, and then the conscious rejection of the belief, and then the adoption of the term atheism. And he kind of hashes out how each of these different phases plays out in the individual atheist. There's also data on biologically why somebody might be an atheist. And there's a lot of articles out there. I didn't focus on biology because my focus was anthropology. And so all of my research was focused around the social aspect. But there was an article that I read that discussed how some atheists fail to become theists. And it discusses sort of the difference in brain cognition and studies that. So that's going to be in the links below too. One thing that I found that was interesting is in the study, when they take a biological look at how people fail to become theists, it's an interesting term of phrase, fail. It kind of shows a bias on the part of the scientists that perhaps it's a deficiency to be atheist, especially given the fact that so many people throughout so many cultures are religious and that it's less popular to be atheist. But the term failed kind of shows that there's perhaps a bias that the person should be theist, or that's the default position to have, or the better position to have. It's something that I found interesting, that even scientific explanations about atheism or looking into atheism can still have a lot of strong religious biases.
I have to tell you, it's terrible being a minority.
And you're like, like in that area, I was very, very Catholic.
Extremely.
But what I found the most fascinating was the philosophical examination of how people come to beliefs. So science looking not so much into why people are atheists, but what makes somebody accept a belief versus reject a belief. And what it came down to is that people will tend to reject a belief when there's not an epistemic or evidentiary reason for it, unless a threshold is met for practical reasons. So when there's just practical reasons, like it makes me feel good, there tends to be more of a rejection of beliefs if there's not evidence to support it. So one of the epistemic reasons why a person might become an atheist is their own cognitive processes. But another epistemic reason why people might be atheists is that there's not enough evidentiary support to support the belief, and therefore the belief is not weighted enough to be held.
And you know what? There is something very interesting here, that the reason why we did this is because people don't know what an atheist is. I'm sure that you have had all the, so, I don't know, do you eat babies or stuff like that?
Nothing quite that bad. But yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions out there about atheists.
And a lot of assumptions. This is what happens when people actually don't care about your opinion and they just assume. And this is something for everybody out there. If you really want to know what somebody thinks, don't use the dictionary, just ask them. Because I don't know if you actually had this problem over there in English, but in Spanish, for example, for a long time, we had some terrible definition in dictionaries. For example, homosexual was defined as a pedophile, or
Ooh.
Yeah, it was awful. Or gypsy was defined as a thief. So it was very offensive, actually. And if you look about atheists, it says that it's somebody who denies God instead of, we don't deny God.
So there's a subtle difference there, huh? Instead of I don't believe in God, it's I'm denying God. And that might seem subtle, but that's really impactful to how people view us.
And it's very strong because if you deny something, you are putting the burden of proof on you. And we are not doing that. We're not saying, hey, I know that your God is not real because blah, blah. We're just saying we don't believe the same things that you do. you should ask people. I think that's kind of the main thing that I want to show through this video, at least.
Yeah, I think just like any other demographic, there's a lot of variety. So you can't just stereotype all atheists as being just one thing. So if you want to know what a person thinks, you just have to ask them and talk to them and not make these pre-assumptions of who they are.
Oh, yeah. I think I have never found a single topic where atheists agree, except I don't believe in that God. I mean,
right.
Yeah, we're so diverse and so many different opinions. It's interesting. So there is not a real stereotypical atheist out there, in the same way that there is not a real stereotypical extreme believer out there.
I agree. Yeah.
Good. So it was awesome talking with you, Laura. I think
it has been fun. Yes.
Yeah, it's great. So everybody, if you like what you saw in here, my channel is Nuestra Experiencia, Atea. It's in Spanish, so obviously if you like Spanish, please go and visit there. It's very helpful and educative if you want to learn the language.
Absolutely. And once again, my channel is Unapologetically Me, and it's all in English, but I intend to work more in the future with you and do more collaborations in both languages.
I promise I will translate some of your episodes. They are amazing, and I really love your content as well.
Thank you.
So thank you everybody for watching. It's been nice, and I hope you really enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you guys.